Hello, heroes of Hyrule. How's it going? What's up? Is everybody here? I didn't even open the chat. What the crap? Where is the what? Hold on one sec. Jeez, I finally found my chat. Thank you. Here you go. Okay, here. Let me open the chat so I can read everything. Not participant. Pop-up chat. Okay, as you can tell, I'm like 1 minute late. Okay, so apparently it didn't do the event. Okay, yesterday live stream basically screwed everything up. Jeez Louise, that's all I have to say. Jeez Louise. Okay, I have the chat in front of me. Finally. Now let me say hi to. Oh my god, there's so many people. What? I didn't even post the Instagram. I didn't. Crap. I was so late. I was late by like 6 minutes. I needed extra 6 minutes, but we're good. We're good. How is everybody doing today? Is everybody excited? Is everyone in the giveaway or not everyone? Okay, so before we start, let me grab all the list from the Instagram first, which is basically ready. Wait, hold on. Open, yes, yes. Hold on. Why do Meti streams always suck? Why do I break everything? What's going on? What am I looking for again? Okay, this. Okay. Wait, no. What am I doing? No, I'm doing something. Wait. Open this. Select this. And where is? Oh, here it is. Okay, fine. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do-do. Meow. Okay. Okay, we're ready. I think I'm ready. Let me just copy this and this. Okay. Okay, are you finally ready? Oh my god, this is taking already too long. Okay, so. Okay, what? What the crap? What the crap? Am I excited? What's going on? Is this my first live stream? No. Okay, so. How we gonna do this is. Let me open this. Let me show you how it's gonna be done. Basically, it's gonna be like last time, where I look at all this coding, where I use a tool which randomizes names and like keeps just one name in the end. And this tool was created by annoying Bokoblin, which some of you might know. He made this tool specifically for me like 6 months ago, and I appreciate it a lot. So thanks a lot to annoying Bokoblin. Um, Thanks to him, I can do giveaways with thousands of names. Okay, how did I do it last time? Was it here, like this? Wait, I can close this. Okay, here it is. Okay, I think I'm good. Wait, we can make it a little bit. Wait, no. Okay, so we're gonna start with the Instagram. because it has like 5,000 followers and it's the most people. This raffle will take oh wait, crap, hold on a second, I forgot to change the time of the script. Jeez Louise, okay. So the first raffle will be the Instagram followers. It will take exactly 8 minutes. I know that because oh wait, I did the time correctly. Okay, okay, because I just multiplied the time. It picks up a name and our total time. So the Instagram one will take 8 minutes. The YouTube one will take around 6 minutes, and the Discord one will take also around 6 minutes. YouTube had around 500 people. It took me a while to heart a lot of comments. Discord had around 600 people, and Instagram is all my followers, so it's 4,800, almost 5,000. Okay, why don't we begin and start raffling the names, shall we? Okay, and I'll say hi to everybody in the chat. Okay, I feel like it's my first live stream ever. What's going on? Okay, so Instagram. Oh my god! I was what? Crap! When I changed to caps, I accidentally muted the mic. Oh, I'm such a noob in live streaming. Not really. I'm just kind of excited for some reason. But anyways, moving on. All the stuff I said was not heard by anybody. So basically, what I said. Jeez. I said hi to everybody, and nobody basically heard it. Uh, so like I said, Instagram will be 8 minutes. YouTube should take around 6 minutes. Discord also around 6 minutes. 500 people on YouTube, 600 people on Discord, almost 5,000 on Instagram. I said we should play a bit Zelda as well. And oh, and again, hi to everybody in the chat again. Hey Melissa, hey Jose, hey Kerry, hey Amir Boyd, hey Melissa Jean, hey Jayton, hey The Soup, hey Lego, hey Emilio, hey Bong, hey Well Yes, hey Apalis, hey Jacko. Okay, can I have a sun, please? I'll try to do my best and play as well. Hey, it's sunny. No, it's not. Hey Zelda Boy 49, hey Bumping, hey Steve, hey Jake, hey Mateo, hey Singularity. I know Singularity is in the giveaway. I remember him. Sir Cat, you're also in the giveaway. I remember. Legend OP. Legends OP is also in the live stream and he's in the giveaway too. You should check out his channel. He does a lot of Dragon Ball Z games. He has cool videos. Legends OP is OP. Hey Jayton, hey Lego again, hey Unfair Admin. Hey, Inkling is also in the giveaway. I remember some of the names. Hey, Phoenix, glad you joined in, my dear admin of Discord. You're also in the giveaway, obviously. Of course, all the Patreon, or I mean, all the patrons I have in Patreon, they're also in all giveaways. So thank you so much for supporting me on Patreon. I really appreciate it. You have a chance to win in all the giveaways, basically. Now, I didn't say this in the rules, but if for any reason someone wins the same, someone wins twice in different giveaway between the Instagram, YouTube, and Discord, if that somehow happens and it's a same username, if somehow that happens in a billion years, then I will choose the other winner because I don't want like someone to win two Switch Lite. Like what the crap? This isn't double Christmas. This is just Christmas. But I doubt that's gonna happen. I mean, come on. Wait, can I have Sun already, please? Jeez, fuck me. Hey, Calvin X. Hey, Popeye. Hey, interesting stuff. Interesting. You're also in the giveaway. I remember. Hey, Simon Morris. Wait, is there any way I can get a? Anyway, I can get some sun so I can see stuff. We're already halfway. Oh, finally, we're already halfway through the names on Instagram. Okay, what do you want me to do in the game? I don't know. What do you want? We have all this immersive, enormous, vast world. Where do you want me to go? What do you want me to do? Army Arts, hello. You're also in the giveaway. I remember. Hey Toxie. Hey Edizo. Hey Tainet again. Hey Belfo. Hey Martin Tippel! Glad you made it to the live stream. One of my admins. I mean mods. On Discord. Shield Surf! You know what? Let's Shield Surf. You know what? Since you said Shield Surf, then let's Shield Surf all of Hyrule again. Let's try again. Let's at least try again. Hey Captain Cookie. Hey the soup. Okay, after the Instagram giveaway, I'll be doing the Discord giveaway. Again, that's gonna take only 6 minutes, and then the YouTube one. Now keep in mind though, that oh my what the crap. Wait, hold on. Flip! Okay, screw you. Now, because the YouTube and Discord giveaway has less people, the names will scroll way slower, like one name per second. But yeah, you can climb it. But I'm gonna make the timer slower, so it's still gonna be like 7 minutes. Don't worry. Am I a noob? What's going on? I forgot how to play the game. Up and away! Hey Rico, hey Walrus from Space Baba. I think you're also in the giveaway, from what I remember. Wow, the names is almost done, like seriously. It's like almost over. Okay, hopefully the winners will be on the live stream so I can talk to them. But I'm gonna... Instagram is easy to contact and Discord too. YouTube is a little bit problematic because there's no messaging on YouTube. But I just go to the... I know which comment I hearted, so I know where the people are, like which video has the person who... which commented I hearted. Okay, after this we'll do the shit surfing. Hey Lego Atom Studio. Hey Flux. Hey Flux, you're also in the giveaway. Oh Flux, you saw your name. Okay, Korok. Who do you think is gonna win? Who do you think is going to win, Cole? Tell me. Who do you think is gonna win? And the winner is Andrew89. Is Andrew89? Hey Zildin, glad you made it. Hey Captain Cookie. So is Andrew P89? Hold on. Let me message him on Instagram right now. Join the stream. Okay. Andrew, I'm messaging you right now on Instagram. Are you here, Andrew? In the chat somehow. Hi, Andrew. You won the giveaway. You won my giveaway. Join the live stream. Wait, is Andrew? Wait, Andrew is here, man. Oh, Andrew's in the chat. I see Andrew Peters. I'm glad you're in the live stream. Congratulations, you won a Nintendo Switch Lite. I'm messaging you right now on Instagram. But okay, you read my message on Instagram too. Okay, congratulations, Andrew, for winning. Okay, now. Okay, he read my message and he's already in chat. So again, for the fifth time, congratulations, Andrew. I'll be sending you a Nintendo Switch Lite. You're gonna give me your details on Instagram and choose the color you want, and I'll send you a Nintendo Switch Lite. I hope you enjoy it, whether you have a Switch or not, or maybe you'll give it to someone. I don't know, it's yours. You can do whatever you want with it. So congratulations, Andrew, and thank you for following me and being a fan, and all of you really, everybody who's watching. Like I really appreciate all the love when you follow, when you comment, when you watch my videos. I appreciate it so much. You have no idea. You have no idea. Um. Okay, so moving on. Andrew P89. You won. Shout out to Andrew P in the chat. Everybody, say Andrew, Andrew, Andrew. Okay, so moving on to the Discord. I need to close this now and reopen it. Okay, so let me make it a 1.1 second for each name. Okay, let me put this here. Wait. Don't mind the coding there. Okay, are you all ready for the Discord giveaway now? Let me change the logo. Okay, we're doing the Discord now. Okay, are you all ready? Are you all ready to rumble? Discord. Hey Rick Ashley, thank you so much for the $1.01 donation. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Too bad you didn't include a message. Okay, are you all ready? When I see a lot of go yes in the chat, I'll press enter. Just say go yes, hype. Say stuff in the chat. Just spam the chat with something, and when I see the spam, I'll just I'll press enter. Spam the chat with stuff. Go yes, good game. Go hype. Go yes. Go Power Rangers. Gee, this is hilarious. Okay, let's hit enter and shield serve the whole map. Enter. Okay. The names are going. They're going slow, but at least you can pick up your name and see. So the first winner in the Instagram giveaway was Andrew P89. Congratulations. Now we're doing the Discord one, and let's try to have some sun so I can see where I'm going when I shield something. Can I see next to it, too? Jeez, thanks. I see many. Ooh, some patrons. I see many. Many familiar names in the in the Discord nicknames. Hey, Michael Lopez. Hey, Goosely. Hey, Jaden. Hey, Long. Hey, Ricky Pro. Hey, Zelda Boy 49. I think Zelda Boy 49 is in the giveaway, if I remember correctly. Hey, Yedid Alexanderson, you're definitely in a giveaway. I know you're in the YouTube one, that's for sure. Okay, can I have Sun just for 1 second? Hey, Chicken Fried Children. Oh, that's a weird name. Hey, Ali and Marta. Walrus from Space, Baba. Yeah, I think he's also in the giveaway. Hey, Simon Morris. Yeah, if I remember correctly, you were in the YouTube giveaway. If I remember copying your name. There are so many names to copy. Oh, jeez. It took me way longer than I thought. Like, this is the last time I choose comments I had. It literally took so long. It took me like almost 4 hours just to get the YouTube ones. Discord was easy, Instagram was a piece of cake. But the YouTube comments, oh my god, that took so long. It was tedious too. Hey, Solo Potato, of course I remember you from live stream and comments. Captain Cookie. I think Captain Cookie is in the giveaway too. Okay, why don't we begin? Let's shield stuff the whole map. Let's try to. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let me see if I remember. Wait, I didn't do the right way. What the crap?
It is my pleasure.
Hold on a second. I jumped in the completely wrong direction. This is what happens when you look at the chat and play. Okay, where was the updraft? Okay. Hey, Snoopy Fasty. Hey, Calvin X. I think Calvin X is also in the giveaway. Hey, Michael Lopez. There's a 0.2% chance to win. I think it's a bit higher because you can be in like all the giveaways. Hey, Tribble. Hey, Black. Wait, that's not the climbable one. Oh, it is actually. How can I see the person who was raffled before? You can rewind the live stream, I guess. Hey, Blix. I'm climbing. Jeez, I didn't even look at the landscape when I took the jump. I was just looking at the chat and let's shield surf. What a fail. Okay, we're almost halfway through the names. I see some patrons losing. No! Okay, so every time I do a giveaway, specifically when I give away a Nintendo Switch console, I always hope... See, that's where you need to jump. I always hope the winner will be someone who doesn't have a Nintendo Switch. You know? But that's just my goals in life. Okay, let's do this. Okay, we're gonna shield surf, like, as far as we can in one go. Hey Calvin X, I basically have all the Zelda amiibos and all the Smash amiibos, besides the Ultimate Smash amiibos. I don't have any of the new ones yet. Okay, I forgot the route. Wait, was somewhere here. I think I need a left here. Yes, I need the left. Oh, I made it. I made it. Okay. Let's see if I remember this correctly. Okay, I think I need to jump here. I think so. I hope so. Please let me be the right jump. Okay, we're good. We're golden. Let's add some explosion. No! Why did I have to shoot the arrow? I failed. Okay, moving on. Let's just continue. That doesn't count. It doesn't count. Just forward the live stream. It doesn't count. Captain Cookie just saw his name. Dang it. Wait. I need to take a left. You know, if you jump and you press a direction, it does that specific... What the crap is that sound? Okay. So you can press like up or side, left, wee. And you can do this obviously. Okay, so this is the tricky part basically. Climbing this up. Okay, wish me luck. Wish me luck! I can make it. Wait, how come the guy always goes from here? Like every time I'm here, he goes from here. Like, what the crap? Caddy Cat Queen is also in the giveaway. I actually remember that. Okay, we made it. We made it so far. Okay. We can do this in one go. Okay, Blix can win. He hasn't seen his name first, apparently. And Eddie Zoe also can win. He hasn't seen his name. Okay, we're down to the last 100. So, good luck to everybody who's still alive over there. 100 gang. Uh-oh. Wait. That's not good. Whoa, that's way too close. No! The tree doesn't count. Just screw the tree. The tree wasn't there. Don't mind the tree. It didn't actually happen. Just ignore that. It was weird pixel. It was just weird pixel. Okay, Serka just saw his name. I just jumped on a choo-choo. I don't think the choo-choo is gonna win the giveaway. Oh no, Eddie saw his name. Okay, 25 people left. It's 25 people left. I'm just going towards the camel. It wasn't really useful. I was trying to jump on the choo-choo. The game wall. What? Holiday Season Novonik! Okay, I just noticed the winner. Wow, there's one patron almost made it to first place. Okay, Holiday Season Novonik, are you in the chat? Are you in the chat? Congratulations, you won a Nintendo Switch Lite. The question is, are you in the chat? Okay, hold on. Let's power the shield surfing 1 second. Oh crap, they can hit me. Okay, Holiday Season Opening. Are you in the chat? Let me message you on Discord. Hold on. Hold on. Where's Discord? Here's Discord. Okay, you better be in the channel. If you're not in the channel, you'll get disqualified. But where are you? Hold on. Hold on. Okay, holiday
Make this
season
bread
novel.
ready.
Holiday. Wait, hold on, hold on, hold on. Where is it? Are you in the chat? Tell me you're in the chat. Identify yourself in the chat if you're here. Okay, let me search him on Discord. Hold on. Holiday. Wait, how can I not find it? Holiday. Oh, here it is. Wait, let me put in the giveaway. Okay, I'm messaging you on. Wait, I'm looking at YouTube. Are you in the YouTube chat? Hold on. Holiday. Holiday season opening. You won the giveaway. Congratulations. Okay, so I message him on Discord. He's pretty high level up in the Discord, I must say. He's a Heroes of the Minish. You need to message quite a lot there. Hey, you won the. Okay, so I posted on Discord the winner, and I also messaged him. Okay, we're done. Is he in the chat? Did he come here to the chat? I don't see him in the chat. It's Cool Ranch Gaming. Oh, here, Cool Ranch Gaming. Okay. Okay, glad you're in the live stream. Glad I find you. Thank you so much. Well, congratulations. Congratulations, Cool Ranch Gaming. You won a Nintendo Switch Lite. I messaged you on Discord. I announced you on Discord as well. I'm gonna message you later, and you'll tell me which, give me your details and which color of the Nintendo Switch Lite you want for late Christmas present. So again, congratulations and thanks a lot for participating. Everybody who was in the Discord giveaway, and again beforehand on the Instagram, I appreciate it a lot. Thank you so much. And again, congratulations to Holiday Season opening, which is Cool Ranch Gaming in YouTube chat, if anybody was wondering. Okay, so all we have left now is doing the YouTube giveaway, the one everybody's been waiting for, I think. Okay, let me open the script again, which is again credits to Annoying Bokoblin for creating this script. Okay, I'll make it a bit. I'll make it 1.5 second. No, I'll make it 1.3 seconds for each name. Okay, okay, okay. Okay, so are you ready for this? Where's the chat? Where's the Discord? Okay, so like always, spam the chat with words and stuff, and I'll press enter to start the giveaway. YouTube. Just spam the chat with stuff. Just say Zelda, Link, Go. Just press enter. Matey, I love you. Anything really. You're looking forward to Breath of the Wild 2. Anything that's on your mind. Just. Okay, that's a good with him. I can't even. What letters are good too. I can't even follow the chat at the moment. Okay, let's press enter and continue shield surfing again. Where's the window? Okay, we started the list. Okay, I need to go there. Okay, bye Choo Choo. Okay, so ignoring the fact we took a short break and I failed twice, let's annoy some Bokoblin. Ooh, that Bokoblin flew away to heaven. Crap, I forgot the road from here. Hold on. No! Oh, it's over there! Oh wait, hold on. I forgot to change the logo. Okay, we're on YouTube now. Okay, I changed the logo. Okay, so good luck to everybody on YouTube here. May the person who doesn't have a Nintendo Switch Lite win. Okay, this is the only place where I have to use the paraglider. So I can continue. What's up, Boko? What's up, second Boko? That was nice. Flax! I just saw Flax's name. Flax is still in the chat. I'm sorry, but you lost. What's up, Yiga? Going through the cool cave. Yes, everybody should hope that someone who doesn't have a Switch Lite should win. Please, have it someone who doesn't have a Switch. Oh, come on, I was doing it perfectly. Wait! Wait! Oh, come on, jeez. I said wait. Why did you have to shoot? Why did he have to shoot? Jeez. Did he have to shoot early? Oh, that's not good. Oh, come on. Why did I go left?
It is my pleasure.
Screw you, Guardian. Hey, thanks for the sub. I saw a nickname subscribing. Thanks a lot. Wait, no, that's the elephant. I need over there. Go, 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 go. Go! Okay, we're going places. Another Yiga? What? Jeez Louise. What? Screw this. I'm gonna grab. I tried to time it correctly. I'm gonna grab. I'm gonna go grab. Wait, I need to learn how to talk. 1 second. I'm gonna go grab Lord of the Mountain. Since the light is on anyways. Hyper Night 10 Gaming, thank you so much for donating $2. I really appreciate it. Godspeed. Thank you so much for tuning in. Wait, what else? Wait, what? Where's the light? Okay, it's still there. It's still there. Okay. Can you do revalidate? Okay. Let's grab it. Let's grab Lord of the Mountain. For the winner. Hey, Kombir, I already played Link's Awakening. I finished that game. I did a live stream too. Like, I think I did an endless live stream. I think I finished in like 2 sittings. Or maybe it was 3 sittings. I don't remember, but I loved it anyway. It's my favorite classic Zelda. What's up? It's all the bunnies! Can you not move? Thank you. What? No! Dang you, Lord of the Mountain. He literally moved in the last second. Like, what the crap? That is Animal Abuse by Hypernight Gaming, which donated $2 again. Thank you so much. Animal Abuse, he abused me. The horse kicked me in the head. Oh, watching on a Switch Lite. Oh, thank you so much for the donation. Kick. What? Your nickname is upside down. Kick Hut. Kick Hut. Thank you so much again for the $2 donation. Oh, Kid Hut. Okay, now I saw. Okay, no more bunnies, but. Well, I really appreciate donations. Wow, thanks a lot. It's kind of surprising. Okay, can you not kick me in the face? Jeez, thanks. Aha. We have him. Where are we going now? Wait, no! No, left. Wait, there's more bunnies here. Wait. Regular arrows, please. Give me rupees! Dang you, trees. Wait, I'm still hitting him. Wait. What happened if I go on rupees with... What? You can pick up rupees with a horse. Oh, hey, Kid Hut. It's upside down and backwards. Yeah, you're right. It's mirrored backside. No, it's not mirrored, but it's upside down and backwards. Wait, thanks again for the $2 donation again. I really appreciate
Rivali's
it.
Gale is now ready.
Okay, new revelation. There's no... You cannot pick up rupees on a horse. If I go offload of the mountains too quick, like for too long, he's gonna run away, so. Let's try to keep him. Whee. Okay, what's up with the names? We're reaching the last 100 people. The last 100 people. Oh, Singularity is out. One of the nicknames I remember. The cooler bow. That was not my fault. Okay, so what am I doing with my life? Oh, okay. I'm just chilling. Wait, there's no guardians around here though. I was hoping to cross a guardian, but there's none here. Okay, 70 people left. Okay, why is the subject in the chat beans? Beans are good. Beans are good. Beans are... All the chat is beans are good. Bloop. Sorry, Boko. What? Wait, don't hit... Oh, don't hit my house. I'm out of here. Let's do the interesting. No! What the crap? No! No! Hey, what? How come the light is still on? That's kind of weird. Ooh, hey, Cyplo, thank you so much for donating $5. Really appreciate it. Go kill a Lionel. Okay, let's go kill a Lionel. With the horse. Okay. Let's go kill a Lionel. I was going for a Guardian, but let's go kill a Lionel. Thank you so much for a $5 donation. Okay, we also have the winner. We almost have the winner. Okay. Apparently the hand of the Hinox. What the crap? Hold on, I gotta see what happened. Really? What? Are you kidding me? Jeez, he just freaking woke up and he killed me. Okay, let's not kill a lion with Lord of the Mountain. Let's just go kill a lion then. Oh, what? Okay, so the winner is in. What the crap? Oh, a patron almost won. Michael Burns, you're the winner. You won a Nintendo. Hey, wait, I still have the hope. You won a Nintendo Switch Lite. Michael Burns, are you in the chat? Please be in the chat. Please be in the chat. Michael Burns. Okay, is it Michael Burns or Michael Burns? Hey, Michael Burns. I'm so glad you're in the chat. Congratulations. You just won the YouTube giveaway of the Nintendo Switch Lite. Congratulations. Okay, are you on Discord so I can contact you? Or easier, because there's no messaging on YouTube. Congratulations, Michael Burns. Can you please post on Discord, Mikel? Please tell me you have Discord. Or you can message me on Instagram, but... Okay, good. I'll wait for your message, Mikel. Mikel Ben. Congratulations for winning Nintendo Switch Lite. You'll choose the color and I'll buy it for you. Now... Okay, wait, is there any more giveaways? Wait, Instagram, Discord, YouTube? Dang it, there's no more giveaways. I wish there was a way so I can just grab all the... grab all the names from the live stream right now. Is there a way to do that and do a spontaneous giveaway? Because if I just copy it, it's just... Dang it. I wish I could do a spontaneous giveaway right now. Okay, so congratulations to Andrew P, who won the Instagram Instagram giveaway. Congratulations to Holiday Season Novanik, who won the Nintendo Switch on the Discord giveaway. And good luck to Michael Burns for winning the YouTube one, which is the hardest, because I had to hard so many comments. But it took so long. But it was worth it, it was fun. Just giving away Switch to hopefully people who don't have Switch. I didn't ask the winner if they had a Switch or not. Wait, Mikel, do you have a Nintendo Switch? Wait, Coaching Gaming, are you still in the chat? Andrew, are you still in the chat? Or did you grab your prizes and just leave? I didn't even ask them if they have Nintendo Switch Lite. Like any type of Nintendo Switch. It's out of the excitement. Okay, so congratulations to all the 3 winners. I hope you'll enjoy my gift to you. I'll be contacting you again, so you tell which color you want, and I will have it sent out as soon as possible to you so you can play Nintendo Switch Lite, and hopefully some of you didn't have a Nintendo Switch before, so you'll get to play it. And if not, maybe you're giving it to someone, I don't know, it's up to you. But either way, Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah, wherever you are in the world. And to end this, we're gonna go kill a Lionel. Or at least try to kill a Lionel. It's rainy, I can't see anything. Well, oh my god, Kidhead, thanks again for the $2 donation. Wow, you're so generous. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Okay, so who's ever still on the live stream, I can't see anything. It's raining and the screen is small. Okay, so again, who's ever in the live stream, who's ever a loyal fan, and stays with me in the live stream, and not waiting for another giveaway. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. How do you go down from this place? Oh, it's over there. Jeez, I can't see anything. Thank you so much for still tuning in. We're gonna end the stream by go killing Lionel, hopefully, with Lord of the Mountain. And maybe I should eat something too, as well. You know? And maybe I should wear something that has some defense, you know? Okay. And maybe put an actual weapon, and a shield, and a bow, which is almost broken. Okay. So the closest Lionel is over here, kind of. We need to go where we basically paused for the for the giveaway readout. Wait, we don't need the names anymore. We don't need the YouTube. Okay, we don't need this anymore. So again, for the 100th time, congratulations to all the winners, all 3 winners on Instagram, Discord, and YouTube. And thanks everybody who participated. Next giveaway, I'll try to make it somehow more vast, so I can choose more people and somehow make the odds higher to win. But it has to be more than one prize, I guess. Maybe I can do a lot of like small prizes, like giving games or eShop gift cards. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. Oh come on! It became a beautiful day. Why does it have to be cloudy? Wait, I have unlimited stamina. Why am I not mashing the A button? What the fuck? What am I doing? What am I doing? Hey Gamer, happy you found my giveaway presentation fun. Hey Melissa Ann, I know you were in the giveaway, Raffle. Sorry you didn't win, but I think you were pretty close. I think so. Hey Fio Kawaii. Hey, I'm just one cat. Hey Steve Anderson. Okay, Steve says giving out games is a good idea. Yeah, actually, not even games. I can just give out like eShop gift cards, and then you can choose whatever you wanna buy. And because if I just give people like a game, maybe some people have it. What's up, Foxy? Do you wanna be my friend, Fox? Come on, be my friend. Come on, I have a holy horse. Come on, be my friend. Don't you wanna hang out? Don't you wanna hang out? Don't you wanna be friends with... Well, he despawned. The fox just got depixelized. Okay. So to end the live stream, we're gonna fight a Lionel. See if I'm not a noob and I can still kill a Lionel without dying. And that's it. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and everybody enjoyed their Christmas and had fun with their family and friends. Corned beer wants beans. Wait, is beans a new meme? Why is everybody talking about memes? About beans? What's up? Whoa! I gotta save that. That was awesome. Without hurting the horse. I'm trying not to hit the horse. Just the Boko. Okay, I hit the horse a little bit, but he survived. Woo! Wait, no, 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 no. Get away from me, you Boko. Okay, now you can. Why don't I have a spear? Why am I not using a spear for finding? Wait, let's not freeze him and... Okay, I'm just pressing ZL and they circle each other basically. Okay, Cornbeer is just obsessed with beans for no obvious reason. Okay, why am I stuck on this Boko anyways? Let's kill a Lionel. What am I doing? Okay, he's supposed to be around here somewhere. Where is the Lionel? Oh, here he is. Oh crap, it's a golden one. Okay, wish me luck, dear heroes. Ooh. It's a battle between two creatures. Imagine if you can play as a Lionel. You'd basically had this perspective. Look how much HP does the Lionel have. Okay. I think he's on. I think it's on. Well, let's get closer. No, wait. No! Wait, no! Wait for me. Hold on. Oh no! He left the building. That's it. Okay, let's just fight the Lionel again. And we don't need freaking arrows that explode. Why didn't he land on him? Jeez Louise. Wait, oh my god. I think that's the first time I hit a Lionel with a spear on his back. That's not even close. Oh, that's not good enough. Wait, he has a spear. That's very. I rarely find one with a spear, to be honest. Okay, let's screw the spear. Let's actually fight him like a link. Come on, I wanted to do something. Jeez, come on, Lionel. What's up? Is he that scared of me? You killed the fox! I mean the wolf! That was epic! Wait, I wanna see the spear again. And save that. Well, he's actually hitting him without the tip, like with the back of the spear. That's kinda cool. Come on, why is he not doing the thing? I'm obviously rusted. Hey, you're mowing the lawn. Okay, can you just stop 1 second? Look at Link, he's weird. The body spins so quickly. Come at me. We're just trolling him at this point. Let's hit him in the tail. Okay, okay, we can do this. Shoot arrows. Oh, this bow is so slow. Can you do what you're supposed to? Oh, no! Come on, why are you doing this? So we won't die by accident. Oh, finally it works. Jeez. Yay, it's broken. Do I have anything that's two-handed? And oh, that's fairly. The boomerang is fairly, really? Haha. What? Wait, that doesn't actually work. Woohoo! Oh no! Let's pay it anyways. Let's net parade, okay. Forget the parry, it didn't work. Anything two-handed weapon? It had no sound. Okay. Second chance. Hey, I made it. Whee! Why can't you do stasis in midair? Uh-oh. Wait, let's do it. Let's do it anyway. Hold on, hold on. Can you stay there? Oh no! Oh crap, that didn't work. That was so bad. That was so bad. That was so bad. Like seriously. I have nothing left that's one-handed. Nothing. Okay, let's use the bigger one, so. Wait, hold on. Ah! Wait, what? It was the wrong shield! Gee, it was the wrong shield. God dang it. That was weird. It did like a flurry rush sound effect instead of a parry. That's very weird. This is gonna be so fun. Do the lightning! This game is so dynamic, it's ridiculous. Like everything is so dynamic in this game, it just happens spontaneously. That was so bad. All my weapons are like two-handed, that sucks. Yeah, let's grab a liner. Oh, what the crap. It's too easy, too easy. Come on. Whoa! I have the power of. Well, I have an idea. Wait, it didn't. Dang it! The sword actually broke before the lightning. That sucks. Okay, let's do something else. Let's not hit him this time. Wait, no, 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 no! Can I disable this, please? Phew! Wait, oh, it's an uphill. Dang it. Wait, why don't I have a shield on? It didn't even hit me. Oh, what the crap! Hey, Hyper King Gaming, is this sponsored or out of your stream budget? What? Oh, you mean the giveaway? No, I just did a giveaway for my own money. What do you mean? Like, why not? I usually don't live stream too much to get donations or tips on live streams. So it's not budgeted of that. I think out of all the tips for my live stream, I never like counted on doing anything. But I do appreciate the generosity, and I see messages way clearer. Hey Lethal Empire, thank you so much for the $2 donation. You're my favorite Zelda YouTuber. Thanks so much. I'm happy I'm your beloved YouTuber. Wait, do I have a shield? No. Okay, I wasn't even concentrating on the game. I was just in the chat, so... Let's do it. So his moveset with spears is very what the crap? I jumped. It's very minimal, like it doesn't do spins, it doesn't... Oh, what the... That was so flanging. I made him cancel the fire blast. Come on, come on. That was so awesome with the shield on. That was so cool. Look, you can see the weapon break in the background. That was so cool. I'm saving too many things in my... Oh my god. Well, I love pairing these. It's fun. My combo! Wait, don't shoot! Wait, don't shoot! Wait, don't shoot! What are you gonna do? Oh, I was so pairing it. I don't have a weapon. What the crap? Wait, what? I didn't even eat like power up stuff, and I didn't even use the attack armor. But that's okay. It just takes longer without using spamming method. But I was so pressing A to mount on him. Oh no! Let's see if I... Oh no! No! I wanted to stasis him right before he does it. But that plan failed. Miserably. Miserably. Will I still have Lord of the Mountains though? No, I don't. Okay, so I was about to kill him, but then I started playing and not care for killing him, and that's what happened. What? All my shields are broken? Okay, Heroes of Hyrule. Before we end the live stream, let me just try what I just tried and succeed. And again, thanks everybody who tuned in the past hour and 11 minutes. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it, and I had tons of fun. And again, congratulations to all three winners. I'll be contacting you again to get your details and your preferable color of the Switch you want. The problem though, I forget to hit him once, so he can break it. But yeah. Okay, let's. We should end the stream and this game over, and that's it. That was hilarious though. Okay, so we're almost ending the year, and I know you're all waiting for me to release Prologue Third of Four Links Adventures, and promise me 2020 will be a big year for Four Links Adventure series, which for some reason a lot of people like. I jokes, I really like it for some reason. I do plan on doing a live stream of watching the movie of Four Links Adventure, so hopefully you're gonna tune in on that. I'm gonna do that in the next week, possibly on the weekend. We'll see how it goes. But until next time, again, congratulations for all the winners who won the Nintendo Switch Lite consoles, and all the viewers who donated and commented in the chat and hung out with me and said so many jokes in the chat. Made me laugh. I appreciate it all, and I love everybody. And until next time, I'll see you on the next Zelda adventure. And that's it. This is the part where my English gets broken even more. So I'll stop talking and just say I love you, dear fans, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Oh wow, hi Hypergaming. Thanks again for the $2 donation. I really appreciate it. And now I can end the live stream. Wait, let me spam the chat even more. Thank you for watching, Heart Container. Okay, Heroes of Hyrule. Now for real. I love you and I would stay here forever with you, but I have to go. I mean, I don't have to go, but we're done here for today. Okay, see ya. Bye, heroes. I'll see you next time.